They said she was too slow, too clumsy, and not fit for the job. Every morning when the rush hour hit the diner, Emily would hurry from table to table with her notepad, her hands trembling slightly as she balanced coffee cups and plates of pancakes. She wasn't old, but she wasn't young either. Somewhere in that middle stage of life where the sparkle of youth had faded and the world seemed eager to replace you with someone fresher. The other waitresses whispered behind her back. Why is she even still here? They giggled, tossing their perfect ponytails as they rushed past her with effortless grace. The manager, Mr. Clayton, rolled his eyes every time Emily dropped a fork or took too long with an order. Customers sighed loudly when she walked away, muttering things like, "Unbelievable. I waited 10 minutes for a refill." To them, Emily was invisible at best and an inconvenience at worst. But what no one noticed was the way her eyes softened every time she looked at people, like she saw something deeper in them. When a little boy spilled his chocolate milk and his mother snapped, Emily knelt down quietly, wiped it up, and whispered, "Don't worry, sweetie. Accidents happen." When a tired truck driver rubbed his temples at the counter, she refilled his coffee before he even asked, sliding it toward him with a small nod. Yet no matter how many small kindnesses she carried out, nobody seemed to care. One rainy afternoon, the diner was unusually quiet. The sound of the storm outside filled the silence as Emily moved slowly between the tables, wiping them down with a damp cloth. She looked exhausted, as though the weight of years of unspoken words sat on her shoulders. A group of college kids entered, loud and careless, laughing as they shook off their wet jackets. They didn't notice Emily standing by the counter, waiting patiently to take their order. One of them smirked, nudging his friend. "Bet she'll forget half of it." They laughed openly, not even lowering their voices. Emily flushed, her cheeks turning crimson, but she said nothing. She scribbled down their orders, her pen pressing hard into the notepad, and hurried off toward the kitchen. From the corner booth, a man watched the whole scene unfold. He was quiet, his face half hidden by the brim of his cap, but his eyes followed Emily carefully, as though searching for something familiar. Emily returned with the plates, burgers, fries, milkshakes, and set them down, one by one. As she turned to leave, one of the boys stuck his foot out, and Emily stumbled. The plates rattled dangerously, and for a terrifying second it looked like they'd all crashed to the floor. But somehow, she regained her balance, clutching the tray tightly. The boys laughed harder. The manager stormed out from the back. "Emily, for God's sake, can't you be more careful?" His voice was sharp, unforgiving. He didn't scold the boys. He didn't even notice them. His frustration was aimed squarely at her. Emily bowed her head, whispering, "I'm sorry," though she hadn't truly done anything wrong. She carried herself back to the counter, her steps slow, heavy. The man in the corner tightened his grip on his coffee mug, his jaw clenched. He had seen enough. But he didn't speak yet, because what he knew, what none of them knew, was that Emily was not who they thought she was. The rain hadn't stopped. It poured down in endless sheets outside, smearing the neon glow of the diner sign into the pavement below. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of fried food and coffee, but also with tension. Tension that Emily carried on her shoulders every single shift. The college boys were louder now, mocking her every move. "Hey, waitress, forgot the ketchup again," one of them called out, even though a full bottle sat right on their table. "Guess she's too old to see straight," another joked, his friends bursting into laughter. Emily's lips tightened, but she didn't answer. She brought over another bottle anyway, setting it down without meeting their eyes. Behind the counter, the cook muttered under his breath, shaking his head. Poor woman, don't know why she puts up with this place. The manager overheard and snapped. Because no one else would hire her. That's why. She should be grateful I keep her here at all. His words cut like glass. And though he said them as if Emily couldn't hear, she did. She always did. She just kept moving quietly, as if each insult added another invisible brick to the load she carried. The man in the corner booth watched it all. He barely touched his food, his eyes fixed on Emily every time she passed. There was a strange look in them, not pity, but something sharper, heavier. He seemed to be waiting for the right moment. Hours passed, the storm outside only grew worse, the diner emptied out, until only the college boys, Emily, the manager, and the man in the booth remained. Emily wiped down a table near the window, her hands trembling slightly from exhaustion. One of the boys leaned back in his seat, smirking. "Hey lady, you missed a spot." He tossed a crumpled napkin onto the freshly cleaned surface. His friends roared with laughter. Emily froze for a moment, then bent down and quietly picked it up. That was when the man in the booth finally stood. His chair scraped across the tile floor, the sound cutting through the laughter. Slowly, deliberately, he walked toward the counter and set down a few bills for his meal. His voice, when he spoke, was low but firm. "You boys think you're funny, but I've seen people like you before, and I promise you don't know who you're talking to." The boys exchanged nervous glances, but their leader scoffed. "What's it to you, old man? She's just some waitress." The man's jaw tightened. He looked at Emily, her face flushed, her hands clutching her rag, and for a moment his expression softened. But when he turned back to the boys, his voice carried steel. "She's not just some waitress. You have no idea what she's done, what she's sacrificed. While you were still in diapers, she was—" He stopped himself, biting the words back. "Never mind, you wouldn't understand." Emily's eyes widened slightly, her chest tightened. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but then she shut it again. Her gaze fell to the floor. The boys muttered under their breath, unsettled now. They grabbed their jackets and stumbled toward the door, their bravado slipping as they pushed into the rain. For a moment, the diner was quiet again, save for the storm outside. The manager barked something about Emily cleaning faster, then disappeared into his office, slamming the door. Emily turned toward the man, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you say that?" The man studied her for a long moment. His eyes softened again, almost mournful. "Because it's the truth. And one day," he paused, glancing toward the stormy window, "one day they'll all know who you are." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She shook her head quickly, as if dismissing it, but deep inside her chest something stirred. A memory, a face, a sound she hadn't let herself think of in years. She quickly turned away, retreating to the back counter, gripping the edge of it so tightly her knuckles turned white. She blinked hard, fighting back the tears that threatened to surface. The man didn't press her further. He only gave a small nod, then stepped out into the rain, vanishing into the storm. Emily stood alone in the diner, her reflection caught faintly in the darkened window. The storm raged outside, but the storm within her was worse, because she knew exactly what he meant. She knew exactly who she was. The rain finally stopped by morning, leaving the streets washed clean. But the diner felt heavier than ever. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, the cracked vinyl seats sticky from the night before. Emily moved slower that day, her back aching from the endless hours, her eyes clouded with fatigue. The college boys didn't return, but their words still echoed in her mind. She's just some waitress. She tried to push it away, but the way the stranger had spoken lingered louder. You have no idea what she's done. She wanted to forget. She had spent years burying it all. But sometimes the past refused to stay buried. At mid-morning, a family came in. 2 kids, a mother, and a father. The children's laughter filled the air, and Emily caught herself smiling faintly as she poured them water. The youngest, a girl with tangled hair and bright eyes, looked up at her and said, "Thank you, ma'am." It was such a small thing, but it pierced through Emily's tiredness, because that simple thank you reminded her of another little girl, one she hadn't thought of in years. For a moment, her vision blurred, and she gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. The sound of a helicopter, the crack of fire, the cries of children, it all came rushing back like a wave breaking through a dam. "Emily?" the cook called from the kitchen window. "You okay?" She blinked, forcing the memory back down. "Yeah, just tired." But she wasn't tired. She was haunted. Later that afternoon, the stranger returned. Same booth, same quiet stare. He didn't order much, just a coffee, but his eyes never left her. This time, Emily walked over. She had tried to ignore him before, but now she needed to know. "Why are you here?" she asked quietly, setting the coffee down. He studied her, as if measuring whether she was ready for the answer. Then he shook his head. "Because people need to remember, even if you want to forget." Her hands trembled. She tightened her grip on the coffee pot to steady them. "Please," she whispered. "Don't." He leaned forward, his voice barely audible. "Emily, the world may have forgotten, but I haven't. I was there. I saw you." Her heart pounded in her chest. She felt her breath quicken, panic pressing at the edges of her mind. "Stop!" she said sharply, louder than she meant to. A few customers turned their heads. Embarrassed, she set the pot down too hard, spilling coffee across the counter. The manager stormed over. "What's the matter with you? Can't even serve a cup without making a mess?" He grabbed the rag from her hand, wiping furiously, muttering insults under his breath. Emily froze, her face burning with humiliation. The customers went back to their meals, pretending not to notice. Only the stranger kept watching her, his expression unreadable. When her shift ended, Emily stepped outside. The air was cool now, the storm clouds breaking apart. She stood on the curb, her hands shoved into her apron pockets, staring at the ground. And then she heard his voice behind her. "You can't keep hiding forever." She turned to see him standing a few feet away, the evening sun casting long shadows across the street. "You don't understand. They don't want to know. People don't care anymore. To them, I'm just a waitress." The man shook his head. "No. To them, maybe. But not to the ones you saved. Not to the ones who are alive because of you." Her knees nearly gave out. She grabbed the railing of the steps, breathing hard. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "I know what you did. I remember the fire. I remember the chaos. You ran back in when everyone else was running out. You carried—" He stopped, watching the tears fill her eyes. Emily shook her head violently, covering her ears like a child. "Stop! Please, stop!" For a long moment, they stood there in silence, the world moving around them, cars passing by, strangers hurrying by, oblivious. Finally, Emily whispered, her voice trembling, "Why can't you just let me be?" The man's gaze softened. "Because heroes don't belong in the shadows. Not forever." Emily closed her eyes, the tears slipping free at last. She turned away from him, retreating down the street, her figure small against the fading light. But his words followed her. Each step she took, they echoed louder. The next day at the diner was quieter than usual. A thin morning fog clung to the windows, and the hum of the neon sign outside felt louder than the conversations inside. Emily moved mechanically, refilling coffee cups, wiping down tables, avoiding eye contact whenever she could. But she knew he would come. And he did. The stranger walked in just after noon, the little bell over the door jingling faintly. He didn't hesitate, went straight to his booth, sat down, and folded his hands on the table like a man waiting for something inevitable. Emily's stomach knotted. She wanted to turn and walk into the kitchen, disappear behind swinging doors, hide where his eyes couldn't reach. But she didn't. Something in her was too tired to keep running. She brought him his usual coffee without asking. When she set the cup down, he looked at her and said softly, "Emily, they deserve to know." Her throat tightened. "No," she whispered. "Yes," he leant forward. "You've carried this burden for too long. You think you're protecting yourself, but what you're really doing is robbing people of the truth. You're robbing them of hope." Her hands shook as she clutched the coffee pot. Memories pressed against the walls of her mind like a storm about to break. The fire, the screaming, the weight of a child in her arms, the heat that blistered her skin, the sound of collapsing steel and shattering glass. She staggered back a step, her knees weak. The stranger's voice softened. "I was there, Emily. I was a boy then. You pulled me out." Her eyes widened. She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. The jawline older now, the hair touched with gray. But the eyes, yes, those eyes she remembered. Terrified eyes, clinging to her shirt as she carried him through the smoke. Her voice cracked. "You were just a child." He nodded. "And you were the woman who refused to let me die." Emily's breath hitched, and she pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. The diner around her seemed to blur, fading away until it was just the two of them. "You don't understand," she whispered. "That day, I lost so many. I couldn't save them all." The man's voice was steady, filled with something like reverence. "But you saved me, and others too. You went back into those towers when everyone else was running away. You didn't stop until your body gave out. People lived because of you. And now, you stand here, letting the world believe you're just a tired waitress." Tears rolled down her cheeks. The years of silence, of carrying guilt heavier than any tray of plates, finally split open. "I wasn't a hero. I was just I was just doing what I could. And it wasn't enough." The man's eyes glistened. It was more than enough. It was everything. The diner had gone strangely still. A few customers had noticed. Forks hovering in midair, conversations cut short. The manager stood frozen in the doorway of the kitchen, his scowl replaced with confusion. Emily sank into the booth across from the man, her hands trembling on the table. She couldn't hide anymore. "All these years, I wanted to forget. I thought if I worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, maybe it would stop hurting." The man reached across the table, his hand resting gently on hers. "And yet, here you are, still carrying us all. Emily, you don't have to hide anymore. The truth doesn't make you weaker. It makes you unforgettable. The words struck her like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. For the first time in decades, she felt the weight on her chest shift. Just slightly, but enough. Around them, silence lingered. And then, unexpectedly, a woman at the counter spoke. "Wait," she said softly, staring at Emily. "You were there on that day." Emily froze, but before she could answer, the stranger nodded. She was more than there. She saved lives. Whispers spread across the diner. Heads turned, eyes widened. The same people who had dismissed her, rolled their eyes at her, treated her as invisible, were suddenly looking at her with awe. Emily wanted to disappear, but she also felt something else. A warmth she hadn't known in years. Recognition. Gratitude. The stranger squeezed her hand once before letting go. His voice was low but certain. "The world may forget names, but it never forgets courage." She sat there, tears streaming down her face, as the diner filled with a silence heavy with respect. For the first time in years, Emily wasn't invisible. She wasn't just a waitress. She was something else. Something she had always been, even when she tried to bury it. A hero. The air in the diner felt different after that day. People who had once brushed past Emily without a second glance now paused when she poured their coffee. Some looked at her with cautious curiosity, others with quiet reverence. Nobody rolled their eyes anymore. Nobody muttered under their breath. But Emily didn't bask in it. She didn't know how. She had spent so many years building a life of silence, of blending in, that being seen felt almost unbearable. The next morning, she came into work earlier than usual. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, and the diner's neon sign flickered against the pale blue of dawn. She stood in the middle of the empty floor, her apron folded neatly in her hands, and let out a long, shaky breath. The stranger, whose name she now knew was Daniel, walked in minutes later. He looked less like a customer and more like someone who had been waiting years for this moment. "Why now?" Emily asked softly, breaking the silence. "Why come back after all these years?" Daniel's gaze was steady. "Because I promised myself that one day I'd find you. I was just a boy when you pulled me out of that building, but I swore I'd never forget your face. I couldn't live knowing the person who saved me was out there carrying all that alone." Her throat tightened. "You could have left it buried." He shook his head. "And let the world keep treating you like you are nothing? No, you deserved better. You still do." Emily's chest ached. For so long she had convinced herself she didn't need acknowledgement, that invisibility was safer. But as she looked at Daniel, she realized it wasn't about her anymore. It was about the people she saved, their stories, their lives, their children who existed because she hadn't turned back that day. Later that week, the local paper ran a story. "Local waitress once a hero. Survivor speaks out." The article spread faster than Emily could have imagined. Soon old photographs resurfaced, grainy images of firefighters, first responders, and civilians who had lived because ordinary people had done extraordinary things. And there, among them, was a younger Emily, covered in ash, her clothes torn, carrying a child in her arms. When her coworkers saw it, they didn't laugh anymore. The manager who once scolded her for moving too slow now spoke to her with a trembling respect. A woman who had once called her invisible walked up with tears in her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." But the greatest moment came one quiet afternoon when a little girl with a red backpack approached Emily at the counter. She held her father's hand, her eyes wide. "Daddy told me you're the reason he's alive, so thank you, because if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be here." She froze, her heart swelling and breaking all at once. She bent down, her hands trembling, as she brushed the girl's hair back. "You're welcome," she whispered, her voice cracking. That night, when Emily finally sat alone in her small apartment, she lit a single candle. She stared at the flame, letting the tears fall freely. For the first time in decades, she didn't cry from guilt. She cried from release. The faces of those she couldn't save still haunted her, but they were no longer drowning out the faces of those she did save. She wasn't invisible anymore. She never had been. And maybe the world had forgotten her name for a while, but not anymore. Because sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest stories, and sometimes the ones we overlook are the ones who carried the weight of the world when it mattered most. Emily closed her eyes, whispered a silent prayer for the past, and let herself finally believe, just for a moment, that she had been enough.